The sandstorm had blown through half a rotation ago, leaving behind curling dunes and a silence thick as syrup. Dale Stenson squinted at the horizon through dust goggles, adjusting the strap across his sunburned face. The twin suns of Elkaris 3 hung low, red and yellow, casting a bruised light across the desert. He shifted his weight and winced his left ankle hadn't like that last stumble across the shale ridge. Still, he pressed on, dragging his cart behind him, its wheels whining against the fine grit. "Stupid idea, Dale," he muttered under his breath. "Real smart. Sign up for a joint expedition with aliens, get dumped by a shuttle 200 clicks from base, lose comms to a sandstorm, and now you're talking to yourself. Real smart." It was supposed to be a cooperative survey. The Oshan delegation had insisted this sector be explored for mineral traces important for trade relations, they'd said. What they hadn't mentioned was the desert worm that nested in the basin. Dale had heard the name whispered in the expedition tent 2 nights before the drop. One of the Oshan, a lanky blue-skinned engineer named Veshik, had trembled when another mentioned the creature. "It moves beneath the sand. It senses vibration. No weapon has pierced its hide. It is death made flesh." Dale had chuckled at the time, half thinking it was superstition. Now, dragging a cart of half-melted survey gear and a cracked sensor drone, he wasn't so sure. The ground trembled. He froze. A low rumble, not thunder, not wind. It was deeper, like the slow stretch of ancient sinew. Dale crouched instinctively, pressing a hand to the sand. The vibration grew stronger, rhythmic, closer. His heart slammed against his ribs, the worm. He lunged for the nearest rise in the dunes, half crawling, half dragging the cart beside him. He dropped behind it, chest heaving, then unlatched the cart and yanked out the only working scanner. It flickered. No thermal reading, of course. The thing had to be cold-blooded. The rumble stopped. Dale didn't move. Sweat tracked down his neck. He held his breath. Then the earth in front of him exploded. A coil of sand and scale erupted skyward. The creature was immense, 20 meters at least, armored in thick, overlapping plates like burnished stone. Its head was a blunt wedge, no eyes. A mouth like a quarry landslide. It reared, then slammed back into the sand. Gone, Dale lay flat, every nerve on fire. He didn't move for 10 minutes. Then he sat up slowly. "Well," he breathed, "guess that's real." It took the better part of 3 hours for him to climb out of the basin. The worm hadn't returned, but every crunch of sand underfoot sent adrenaline surging through his veins. By sunset, he'd reached a ridge overlooking a narrow canyon. He dropped to one knee and grabbed his canteen, nearly empty. He looked down at the canyon, mind churning. If that thing hunted by vibration, it had to come up from beneath. So what if the ground wasn't solid? What if it fell into something it couldn't climb out of? He ran a hand down his sun-chapped face. A pit. A real one. Big enough to swallow a worm. Deep enough to hold it. He opened the cart and pulled out the last of his field explosives, enough for a seismic test barely. He'd need more material. Reinforcement poles. Heat netting. Something to bait it. He looked back at the canyon. Then he looked at the broken drone. He grinned. By the time Dale had laid out the trap, his arms were bleeding from hauling composite poles and his back ached like it was full of gravel. The drone had been salvaged into a crude decoy, its power core still flickering. He'd mounted it on a vibration plate built from the cart wheels and a salvaged motor housing. It pulsed every few seconds, mimicking footfalls. The pit itself had taken 2 days. He'd used the seismic charges to break the crust of the canyon floor, then spent hours digging with a makeshift shovel made from a broken panel. The heat netting was strung over the top, disguised with sand and false dunes. He'd slept only 4 hours in that time, curled under a tarp while the wind howled over the ridge. Now he waited. The sun beat down. His lips were cracked. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The vibration plate thumped once, twice. The sand rippled, then the ground buckled. The worm rose, slower this time. It hesitated, the wedge of its head tilted as if uncertain. The plate thumped again. It lunged. The sand gave way beneath it. The beast plummeted into the pit. Dale scrambled forward, triggered the netting release. The mesh dropped, sealing the top with a metallic snap. The worm roared, a low, grinding sound that vibrated through Dale's spine. He collapsed backward, laughing with something halfway between relief and madness. "It worked," he gasped. "It actually worked." The next 3 days were brutal. He rationed his last water and spent hours reinforcing the pit walls with scavenged plasteel from the drone. The worm didn't try to escape. It hissed, sometimes, and coiled in the shadows, but it didn't lunge. Not after the second day. That was when Dale lowered a ration bar into the pit. The worm sniffed, then it ate it. That night Dale dreamed of riding it across the desert. By the 6th day he was out of water, out of food, and nearly out of strength. But the worm let him approach the edge of the pit without snarling. It watched him, silent. He leaned over. "I'm going to die out here if you don't help me, buddy." The beast blinked, slow and deliberate. Dale took a chance. He dismantled the netting, careful not to make sudden movements. Then he used the last of the drone power to emit a steady vibration, one that mimicked his own pulse. The worm climbed out. It didn't attack. It circled him once, then lowered its head. He stared. "Guess we're doing this." By the time Dale stumbled into the forward outpost, riding atop a creature straight out of a nightmare, every Oshan on the base had gathered in stunned silence. Veshik stood at the front, his blue skin pale. "You rode it." Dale slid off the beast's back, landing hard. His knees buckled. He caught himself against the worm's side. "I trapped it, fed it, figured out how it senses things." "You tamed it?" Dale looked up at the creature, which had settled like a content dog beside the outpost wall. "I asked it for help. It said yes." Veshik blinked. "You are very strange." Dale grinned, cracks in his lips reopening. "Yeah. But I'm not dead, so I'll take it." He passed out before anyone could respond. It took over a week in the infirmary before Dale could walk without support. The Oshan medics did what they could, but human biology was still a mystery to them in many ways. The dehydration alone had nearly shut his kidneys down. But he survived. When he stepped outside, cane in hand, the worm was waiting. It had stayed by the outpost the entire time. Every now and then it would circle the wall, then settle again near the gate. The Oshan avoided it like a plague. Dale limped toward it. The worm turned, then slowly lowered its head. He rested a hand against its cooled scales. "We've got a lot of desert left," he said. "You up for a ride?" The worm rumbled softly. Dale grinned. "Good, 'cause I'm not walking." He climbed up, slower this time. As the worm began to move, the sand kicked up behind them, and Dale couldn't help but laugh. Maybe it hadn't made sense. Maybe it shouldn't have worked, but it had. And now he had a ride no one in the galaxy would forget. The worm's breath steamed faintly in the dusk air as Dale crouched on its flank, adjusting the straps on a canvas pack. The outpost's courtyard had gone eerily quiet again. A few Oshan technicians lingered by the upper ramparts, eyes flicking between Dale and the creature like they expected it to explode. He tightened the final strap and gave the worm a firm tap just behind what he guessed was a shoulder joint. "That's it, big fella. No more jury-rigged transport crates. We're going proper this time." A ribbon of pale light traced the edge of the horizon. It was the second evening since he'd left the infirmary, and his legs still protested with every step. The hydration packs stitched into his clothing itched, but they worked. A medic named Teshin had insisted he wear them until his levels were remotely within standard thresholds, whatever that meant. "You should not be conscious," Teshin had muttered while scanning his vitals the morning after his release. "Or upright. Or functioning." "I'm stubborn," Dale had said, brushing off the sensor nodes. "No, you are metabolically absurd." Now, under a sky turning to violet, Dale was preparing to head back into the desert. "Veshik," he called up toward the rampart, "you sure this is the fastest way to the mineral shelf?" The Oshan engineer leaned over the railing, teeth clicking as he considered. His robes were tightly cinched at the waist, and a cluster of slates blinked with scrolling data at his hip. "Fastest, yes. Wisest?" His fingers fluttered in the air. Unclear. The western basin is geologically unstable. The last mapping attempt lost 3 crawlers. Dale glanced at the worm, which had begun nosing at the sand near the outer gate. Good thing I'm not taking a crawler. Veshik's pupils contracted in a nervous flick. You are not intending to descend into the shelf itself, are you? Dale strapped on his goggles. If the minerals are down there, I need samples. This thing's not just for show. Your species doesn't value continuity of existence, do you? We're very bad at staying bored. Veshik exhaled through gill slits just below his ears, a sound like boiling tea. Then I wish you luck, human Dale. Should your bones calcify into the canyon wall, I will attempt to retrieve your data slate. Touching, Dale muttered, swinging into position. The worm moved as if it had been waiting. It pushed through the reinforced gate without hesitation, its bulk sliding over the sand like a ship on still water. Dale steadied himself, one hand braced against the low ridge of plated armor. They moved in silence for a long stretch. The outpost shrank behind them, swallowed by the dunes. 2 hours later, the landscape changed. The air grew heavier, and the sand gave way to cracked plates of dry clay that shifted under the worm's weight. Dale leaned forward and tapped a sensor node on his wrist. The readings were erratic. Pockets of gas beneath the surface, unstable pressure zones, and something else, magnetic distortion. He frowned. You seeing this? The worm didn't respond, obviously, but it slowed. It raised its head and swayed once, then shifted course by several degrees without prompting. Dale narrowed his eyes. All right, let's see what you're picking up. The shelf appeared just before the third dusklight. A gouge in the earth, wide as a riverbed and at least 100 meters deep, its walls striated with bands of black and amber ore. Dale dismounted and crouched near the rim, brushing away loose dust with a gloved hand. The mineral signature was strong, stronger than expected. He activated the sampling rig and lowered it on a tether. The device hummed softly, then clunked against something metallic. He froze. There was no infrastructure out here. No mining posts, no shipwrecks. Nothing registered in the Oshan planetary records, which he double-checked before leaving. He reeled the sampler back up. A fragment of metal clung to the probe's edge, not natural alloy. Manufactured. Scratched and scored, but unmistakably shaped, Dale ran a thumb over the edge. That's a hull plate. The worm stirred behind him. Its body shifted, muscles tensing. It looked down into the canyon and let out a low, rumbling sound different from anything he'd heard before. Dale stood. What is it? The sound came again, and this time it wasn't from the worm. A tremor passed through the ground. Subtle, but enough to send a few pebbles skittering down the canyon wall. Dale didn't wait. He snapped the sampling rig into his pack and climbed back onto the worm's back. Something was moving below, not like the worm, faster, erratic. He tapped the side of his goggles, switching to low light mode. The canyon pulsed with faint heat signatures, overlapping and indistinct. Not good. Not good at all. The worm backed away from the edge, then turned sharply and began to retreat along a different path than they'd arrived. Dale didn't argue. They rode through the night. Stars wheeled overhead and Dale's limbs burned from tension. The worm didn't slow until the sun began to rise over the eastern dunes. When it did, it turned in a slow arc and raised its head high, scanning the horizon. Dale eased off, legs wobbling. He dropped to a crouch and pulled out his field transmitter. The signal crackled, then caught. Outpost Delta, this is Stenson. I've got samples and a possible wreck site. Also, there's movement under the shelf, possibly multiple entities. Silence, then static. Then Veshik's voice clipped and tight. Acknowledged, human Dale, we detected the tremors. There was a brief seismic disturbance. Your coordinates place you near Archive Sector 4. That area was sealed after the previous extinction cycle. What extinction cycle? Another pause. Classified. Dale stared at the transmitter. You're joking. I do not joke. He lowered the transmitter slowly. You sent me into a dead zone. We did not anticipate your mode of travel would allow access. Right. He looked back toward the canyon. Well, something's awake down there. Return immediately. We will initiate containment. No, I want to know what it is. Your persistence is, yeah, I know, absurd. He cut the transmission. The worm had settled again, its head resting on a lip of stone. Dale approached and crouched beside it. You knew something was down there. It didn't move, but its body was coiled tightly. He reached out and pressed his hand against its scale. You weren't afraid of me, but you're afraid of that. He sat beside it for a while, watching the sky brighten. He had what he needed: samples, data, proof of the wreckage, but his curiosity gnawed at him. He pulled out his slate and began logging the readings, his fingers moving fast. The signal interference meant a delay on the data relay, but eventually it would reach the outpost. At least someone would see it. The wind picked up. Not a storm, just the usual dawn gusts that swept the upper dunes. Dale stood and looked at the worm. Let's go back. It rose slowly, and this time it didn't hesitate. They reached the outpost by the second dusk. The gates opened without a word. Veshik met them in the courtyard, flanked by 2 security personnel with pulse staves. You're lucky, Veshik said, not moving closer. I'm consistent, Dale replied, sliding off the worm's back. His knees buckled and he caught himself before hitting the ground. You need glucose. Sit. No argument. He collapsed onto a bench as one of the techs handed him a pouch. He tore it open and drank, the taste sharp and metallic. His vision steadied within minutes. We ran your samples, Veshik said. The alloy isn't in our database. It predates our current epoch. So you've had contact with someone before, Veshik hesitated. That canyon was a crash site, Dale continued, and whatever's down there wasn't dead. Veshik's gill slits pulsed. It wasn't supposed to activate. What is it? We don't know. We call it the hollow pulse. It reacts to movement and heat, but only in proximity to ancient tech. Dale looked at the worm. It avoided it. They remember. Dale leaned back on the bench, the pouch still half full in his hand. Then we need to talk about what else you haven't told us. Dale lay on the gurney in the auxiliary med bay, his shirt peeled halfway off and dried salt tracing every fold of skin. His ribs ached, his right hand trembled every time he tried to hold a cup, and his legs still felt like overcooked pasta. A blanket was draped over his knees, more ceremonial than useful in the heat, and a trio of Oshan medics hovered around him, none particularly eager to get too close. One of them, a short, silver-skinned female with 6 fingers and a medical scanner shaped like a tuning fork, finally broke the silence. You consumed only filtered water and glucose paced for 3 planetary cycles. Technically, yeah, Dale said, voice raspy but steady. Some of the rations were half melted, so I had to improvise. Ate part of a thermal patch on mistake, but it didn't kill me. I'm not certain that's an accomplishment. He tried to shrug, but the motion sent a spike of pain through his shoulder. Can I go now? I've got a meeting. No, the male medic to his left said flatly. His skin was a deep green, his eyes pinprick small. You have renal stress, muscular degradation, and your left orbital socket is bruised from what was it again, face first into a dune. You ever try riding something with no saddle and a back like a gravel road? The medic made a noise like a disgusted cough and handed him another pouch of electrolyte fluid. You are not leaving until we induce repair acceleration. That'll take hours. Yes, the third medic said. He hadn't spoken until now, his voice was strangely calm. And you're lucky your cardiac rhythm didn't collapse. Your body's compensating for multiple failures simultaneously. Human or not, you're pushing the threshold. Dale drank from the pouch anyway, then leaned back. Fine. But I'm not missing the debrief. You'll attend virtually. Nope. He started sitting up again, wobbling but determined. I'll limp there if I have to. I was the one who found the wreckage. I'm not letting a committee of blue-shelled bureaucrats twist that into a footnote. The green-skinned medic sighed and turned off the scanner. Your species is exhausting. We get that a lot. He dressed slowly, every movement deliberate. The medics handed him a walking brace, which he accepted without protest. No point pretending he could march around like nothing happened. He'd already blacked out twice since returning. By the time he limped into the main council chamber, The room was already buzzing. The Oshan rarely raised their voices, but their equivalent of shouting involved rapid gill pulses and overlapping whistle tones that reminded Dale of a wind tunnel filled with angry birds. He waited at the back until Veshik noticed him. "You were ordered to remain under observation." "I observed myself. I'm still alive. That counts." A pair of Oshan nobility noticed his entrance and shifted uncomfortably. One of them leaned closer to the other and whispered something that Dale didn't catch, but he didn't need a translator to get the gist. "They think I brought a plague beast into their lap, don't they?" Veshik didn't deny it. "You rode a creature they believe to be a mythological harbinger of collapse. Some now think you've initiated a second extinction event. They think the worm's contagious. They think it's symbolic. Well, that's even worse." He limped forward, planting the brace with a soft thud each step. "Let's clear this up, then." The central dais was shaped like a spiral, with each tier occupied by a different delegation. Dale stepped onto the lower level, prompting a ripple of movement as several Oshan leaned back as though he might explode. He tapped the control panel and brought up the scan data. 300 meters below the mineral shelf, there's a debris field composed of manufactured alloys. Not Oshan, not human, not any of the registered trade species. The field is surrounded by dormant tech mechanical, not organic, but some of it's still active. Barely. That's what triggered the seismic pulse. An older Oshan with a crest of silver along his scalp clicked his mandibles. "And you interacted with this?" "I didn't touch it." "I wasn't dumb enough to poke the mystery box, but the worm sensed something was wrong. That's why it wouldn't go near the canyon." "The creature, this entity, should not be alive," the elder continued. "Its kind vanished before our oldest records began. Guess someone forgot to tell it that." There was a silence, then one of the delegates from the outer ring spoke. "It obeyed you." "No," Dale said. "It followed me. There's a difference." Another voice, this one younger and sharper. "You claim the beast responded to your direction. Are we to believe it understood you?" "It didn't have to understand language. It understood urgency, hunger, pain. I gave it something it needed and it didn't kill me. That's not obedience." "That's trust." Veshik stepped forward now, his robes rustling. "The human's data matches our own historical markers. The alloy is consistent with pre-collapse metallurgy. The canyon may have been a crash site from one of the early contact attempts." A murmur spread through the chamber. Dale waited, letting it run its course, then he said, "Your archives didn't mention that, which means either you forgot or you buried it." The elder stiffened. "It was sealed, not erased. Same result." Another delegate stood. Her robe was patterned with shifting iridescent scales, her face narrow and unreadable. "Why return to the canyon at all? You had no directive." "I wanted to know what scared the worm." He shifted his weight and winced. "And now I do. It wasn't the wreck. It was what's still inside it." The chamber quieted again. "I'm not saying you need to unseal the whole place," Dale continued. "But if we're supposed to be allies, we can't keep stumbling over each other's ghosts. You want to keep pretending the past didn't happen? Fine. But eventually, it's going to crawl out of the sand and bite someone." The silence broke, this time with a low, slow exhalation from the elder, not anger, resignation. "You are not the first outsider to challenge our memory. But you are the first to survive its consequences." Veshik stepped beside Dale now. "He didn't just survive. He corrected our oversight. Whether we like it or not, the worm is part of this world, and so is he." The elder inclined his head slightly. "Very well, the canyon will be reclassified. A joint expedition will be formed, human participation permitted." Dale didn't smile. He just exhaled heavily. He left the chamber before the echoes had fully faded. Outside, the sun was high again, and the worm waited beside the outer wall, its bulk casting a deep crescent of shade. Dale approached, slower this time. "You didn't have to stick around, you know." The worm shifted, its weight settling. It didn't move away. He sat beside it, resting his back against its flank. The stone-like scales were warm but not uncomfortable. "I think I'm grounded for a while." No more canyon dives, no more starvation diets. He paused, then added, "They want to study the wreck, properly this time, with caution." The worm made no sound, but its sides rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Dale leaned his head back, eyes half-lidded. "You dragged me out of there alive." "I'm not going to forget that." The suns moved slowly overhead. The wind carried a dry whisper across the dunes, and for the first time since arriving on Elkaris, Dale felt like he could just sit still. Not out of exhaustion, but because for once nothing needed fixing.